Welcome to AI Explains. Today we're conducting a bit of what you might call macroeconomic archaeology.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to put it.
Right, and if you are completely unfamiliar with this field, don't worry, we are going to explain it in very simple terms. We are looking at a working paper by Robert Barro, Jose Ursua, and Joanna Wang that digs into the 1918 Great Influenza Pandemic.
But they aren't just, recounting the tragedy. They're actually running the numbers to separate the economic damage of the virus from the sheer chaos of World War I.
Which is huge because they want to see what that teaches us about the upper limits of modern crises. And it's not just about numbers. It's about how a virus might have indirectly caused World War II.
It is a really fascinating study in disentangling history. I mean, the authors are essentially trying to isolate the virus variable in a global equation that was incredibly messy.
Very messy. So before we get to the projections, let's look at the baseline. The 1918 flu killed an estimated 40 million people. That's about 2.1% of the entire global population at the time.
And the distribution was shockingly uneven. We often hear it called the Spanish flu.
Right, because Spain was neutral in the war and had a free press that actually reported on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the data points to India as the true epicenter.
Yeah, I saw that. India suffered about 42% of the world's total flu deaths. It really highlights how pandemics hit developing economies the hardest.
But here is the core challenge for the authors. You have a world war and a pandemic happening simultaneously. How do you prove the economy tanked because of the flu and not because of the war?
Because if GDP drops, is it a lockdown or a battlefield loss?
Exactly. So the authors used combat death rates as a proxy for war intensity.
Oh, so they basically calculated the economic destruction statistically predicted by the war deaths, and then whatever economic damage was left over.
That was the flu. It is a brilliant way to filter out the noise. And once they isolated the virus's impact, the results were stark. In a typical country, the flu alone caused GDP to drop by 6% and consumption to fall by 8%.
Which is a massive contraction. It lowered returns on stocks and drove up inflation globally.
It was a synchronized global shock.
And speaking of shocks, the paper makes a connection between the flu and geopolitics that is honestly mind-blowing. It lists famous victims like sociologist Max Weber and Frederick Trump, Donald Trump's grandfather, but the specific note on Woodrow Wilson is wild.
This is the butterfly effect aspect of the research. President Wilson contracted the flu in early 1919.
While he was in Paris negotiating the Versailles Treaty to end World War I.
Right, and the historical accounts suggest he suffered severe cognitive impairment and exhaustion from the virus. Because he was so weakened, he essentially gave in to the French and British demands for incredibly harsh reparations from Germany.
And we know where that road leads. Those harsh terms devastated the German economy.
Which arguably planted the seeds for the rise of Hitler and World War II.
It is chilling to think that a microscopic virus might have tipped the scales toward a Second World War.
It connects the biological to the geopolitical in a very direct way.
So if we bridge that history to the present, the paper calculates a worst-case scenario for today. If we apply that 1918 mortality rate to our modern population, what are we looking at?
You are looking at a theoretical upper bound of 150 million deaths worldwide.
The scale of that is difficult to process, and economically.
The model suggests an economic contraction roughly comparable to the global Great Recession of 2008 and 2009. But this brings us to the most important distinction the authors make between 1918 and today.
The nature of the trade-off. Because in 1918, they didn't really choose the economic hit. It just happened because people were dying.
Correct. The economic damage was largely involuntary due to labor shortages. Today, with modern interventions, countries effectively choose to lower real GDP. We voluntarily curb travel and commerce to suppress mortality.
So the equation flips. We accept a recession to avoid that 150 million death toll. We are buying survival with GDP.
That is the modern luxury and the modern burden. We have the capacity to intervene, which means we have to decide how much economic value we are willing to trade for human life.
It really reframes how you look at these events. You can't separate the health of the population from the health of the economy.
Or the stability of the world map.
I'll leave everyone with this thought. If a flu virus in 1919 could silently rewrite a peace treaty and reshape the next 30 years of history, what invisible impacts are current global health events having on the history being written right now?
That is the question we will be answering for decades.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. Stay curious.